¿Iniciamos? Okay. Buenas tardes. Es un privilegio contar con la presencia del doctor David Konstan en esta conferencia magistral. David Konstan es profesor de estudios clásicos en la Universidad de Nueva York. Su licenciatura fue en matemáticas y su doctorado en clásicos. Su investigación se enfoca en literatura antigua, griega y latina, especialmente en comedia, novela y filosofía clásicas. Ha estudiado, entre otros temas, las emociones y los valores en Grecia y Roma clásicas. Y ha escrito una veintena de libros y casi 500 artículos sobre temas como amistad, compasión, perdón, belleza o amor. Su más reciente libro es El origen del pecado, Grecia y Roma, judaísmo temprano y cristiandad. Konstan ha sido profesor visitante, entre otros lugares, en Nueva Zelanda, Escocia, Brasil, Argentina, Sudáfrica, Australia y Egipto. Fue presidente de la Asociación Filológica Americana, ahora Sociedad para los Estudios Clásicos, y es académico de la Academia Americana de Artes y Ciencias y miembro honorario de la Academia Australiana de las Humanidades. Doctor Konstan, por favor.
Muchísimas gracias. ¿Me puede ir fácilmente? Bueno, I am going to speak today in English. I regret to say, this seemed to have been a condition for making our conference international, pero me hubiera gustado también dar la conferencia en español, quizás en otro momento. I will now begin my talk, and I will share the screen and to show you the PowerPoint, which should be here. Just a moment while I pull the PowerPoint up, and then we'll have it ready. Now I'll share the screen. Just one moment here, and I think we'll be all set. Here we go. So, Catullus's dirty kiss. I wish to talk today about one poem by Catullus, and a short one. It is the 99th poem in the usual order, an epigram addressed to the boy Juventius. Now, here is the text, which I will read in a translation by Klein. That's an online and fairly accurate translation. And it runs as follows. I stole a sweet kiss while you played, sweet Juventius, one sweeter than sweetest ambrosia. But it wasn't taken with impunity. For more than an hour, I remember, I hung at the top of the gallows while I was justifying myself to you. Yet, with my tears, I couldn't lessen your anger a tiniest bit. No sooner was it done than your lips, rinsed with plenty of water, you banished it with your fingers, so nothing contracted from my lips might remain, as though it were the foul spit of a tainted whore. More, you handed me unhappily to vicious love, who has not failed to torment me in every way. So that sweet kiss, altered for me from ambrosia, was more bitter than bitter hellebore then. Since you lay down such punishments for unhappy love, now after this, I'll never steal kisses again. Now some commentary from some of the major editors and interpreters of Catullus's poetry. In his ample edition, dating to the end of the 19th century, Robinson Ellis remarks, the poem is interesting from 2 points of view, from the comic exaggeration of the offense and from the medical character of the language throughout. Wilhelm Kroll, the great German commentator, rather prosaically explains, Catullus stole a kiss from his beloved and Juventius, but the joy of this caress was soon turned into its opposite, since Juventius made no secret of how repugnant he was to the contact. The poem is purely literary and the expression cumbersome. Merrill, And here's another one of these commentators. Simply writes, he entitles his commentary on the cruelty of Juventius in shunning the poet's kiss. Notice, on the cruelty of Juventius. D.F.S. Thompson, in his 1997 edition, introduces the epigram as follows. Here you go. David Ross rightly characterizes this poem, in contrast to the general tradition of Catullus's epigrams, as an occasional experiment involving a tone of delicacy to be found rather usually in the polymetrics and the longer poems. Kenneth Quinn agrees, and he comments crisply, and here's the next example. The last, longest, and most elegantly worded of the Juventius poems. He obviously doesn't agree with Kroll on this. Akbar Khan notes the influence of Greek poetry, and especially Theocritus's 20th idyll on the epigram. He says, Catullus could well have taken the 20th idyll of Theocritus as an important ingredient in the composition of poem 99, together with other Hellenistic epigrams. David Ray, in his book on Catullus, like Ellis, emphasizes the hyperbolic expression. Even the frustration or mortification of an appetite is thrown into the relief of performative excess, as when Catullus, having stolen a single kiss from the boy Juventius, describes himself as hung high upon a cross for more than a whole hour, weeping and pleading while the boy washes Catullus's kiss off his lips as though it were the foul spittle of a wolf that smelled of piss. We get very, very strong language in these things. Now, Charles Martin, in his fine little book, notices, and here's again an example, once again, the beloved is an edible delicacy whose kisses are even sweeter than ambrosia. In español se dice para comérselo. The explicit imagery Catullus uses to describe the operation suggests that he may also be not too far from revulsion at the thought of sexual intimacy. For his own gesture now appears to Catullus as a return to that world of furtive sex in alleyways. By the way, Fordyce, the commentator on it, admits the poem entirely. So elegant, hyperbolic, learned, maybe even a little nauseating. But wait a minute, we are in the age of Me Too. Enough about aesthetics and Catullus's hurt feelings at the boy's violent rejection. What about Juventius's feelings at being the recipient of an unwanted kiss? Such behavior today is enough to cast a shadow on a person's career. The governor of New York State, a powerful politician, was obliged to resign from office for such behavior. Is this not a poem about sexual violation? The reduction of the boy to a mere object, a case of sexual assault and predation? Now, I hear the reaction coming. Hang on, aren't we being anachronistic here? This was ancient Rome, not modern America. Mores were different then. We can't read our sensibilities back into those times. Indeed, some of those accused today of sexual misconduct that took place decades ago have pleaded the same excuse. Life was different then. People were less alert to the harm that such conduct may inflict on unwilling victims. Catullus's sentiments would have been shared by most men, maybe even most women and boys in first century BC Rome. It is in violation of the elementary criteria of good criticism to demand that his poems conform to standards of behavior that were not imagined in his days. And so you might say, go no further. And yet, I believe that it is not wholly off the mark to detect in this epigram an awareness, perhaps implicit or even subconscious, another anachronistic term, that Catullus's act was a form of violence, and that Juventius's reaction was not simply this peevish or the spoiled arrogance of a pampered boy, but a legitimate response to abusive treatment. What first led me to suspect such an implicit meaning in the poem was a brief article by Phyllis Young Forsyth, published way back in 1979. The article was part of a series of studies in which Forsyth argued that Catullus's poems betrayed a self-conscious thematic organization that is evident not so much in the arrangement of the whole book, but rather in local sequences. In the particular paper I'm talking about, she selects Carmena 97 to 99. 99 is the last one, which she labels the foul-mouthed poems of Catullus. Now, Forsyth remarks, because of their distasteful subject matter, two of these epigrams, 97 and 98, have been badly neglected, while poem 99, that's our poem, because of its membership in the so-called Juventius cycle, has been given some attention. Yet it is my contention, she writes, that none of these epigrams is fully intelligible without due consideration of the other two. That, in brief, these three poems form a triad meant to be taken together. Well, let me remind you of the contents of the first two in the sequence. Poem 97 begins, and I'll read the English here. I did not, may the gods love me, think it mattered whether I might be smelling Aemilius's mouth or his arse, or in American English we would say his ass, his culo. The one is no cleaner, the other no dirtier. In fact, his arse is both cleaner and nicer since it has no teeth. So that's one of the poems. That's 97. Now, there is more in this poem, even worse. But the conclusion is that hic, this one, futuit multas, esse facet esse benustum. That is, he has sex with many women and he makes himself out to be charming. Futuit multas, women. Futuit is a strong Latin word, and he pretends that he is venustus, a very important word for Catullus. The next poem, as Forsyth observes, is on bad-smelling breath. It's addressed to one Victius, and he concludes, and here's the next poem. If you want to destroy us completely, Victius, gape at us, open your mouth. What you'll desire, you'll wholly achieve. In other words, his breath is so bad that if he simply opens his mouth, it will kill everybody. Now, both poems, in fact, invoke the idea of culum lingere. I think we know what that means, though I haven't quoted the relevant verses here. Now, Forsyth concedes that, and what she puts here is, at first glance, this Juventius poem may seem to have little in common with the preceding invectives against Aemilius and Victius. However, she says, a closer inspection reveals that Catullus has in fact continued the foul-mouthed theme, but with an ironic twist. Because when he acknowledges that Juventius wiped away the traces of the kiss so that nothing contracted from my lips might remain, as though it were the foul spit of a tainted whore, Catullus now finds himself put in the same category as vile Aemilius and Victius. Here we have three poems with terrible breath, and the terrible breath is as a consequence. The irony is all the worse in that Aemilius is successful. He screws all the girls, whereas Catullus obviously is not. And from this, Forsyth concludes, and so it would seem that those who truly have foul mouths, do well, while the poet whose mouth is not really foul at all, we want to ask why not, gets nowhere with Juventius. We're reading this from Catullus' point of view. And so we say his mouth isn't foul, but the others are. So here's the way that she looks at it. Now, it was at this point in Forsyth's exposition that I was moved to reflect, is it true that Catullus's mouth is not foul? Why assume so? It was clearly distasteful to Juventius. Was there, I asked myself, even a hint, given the context of the poem, that Catullus might have imagined himself to be Venustus, only to discover that that is not how others necessarily saw him. Excuse me. After all, his invective and satire against those vulgar individuals who thought they were belli, members of the smart set, and who evidently managed to impress the ladies and their own peers, might Catullus have suddenly perceived himself as one of them? One thinks of that chap from Pisarum, of whom Catullus wrote, reading the English again, can there be no one in all these people, Juventius, no nice man you might begin to like, besides that guest of yours, yellower than a gilded statue, from the environs of deadly Pissarro, who pleases you now, whom you dare to prefer to me, and you don't know and do know who knows what with him. So here's a case where Juventius evidently does have preferences, and the preference doesn't turn out to be Catullus. So might Catullus' doubts about his own refinement have found expression, even if only momentarily and perhaps accidentally, as he realized that his polish also might be nothing more than gilding, inaurata, gild that is just a surface on a base metal statue. These questions, as I said, were stimulated by Forsyth's argument concerning the collocation of these three poems. Indeed, we know that Catullus could put himself in the position of the other, as we say today, when in poem 64, he gives expression to Ariadne's sense of abandonment as Theseus sails off, leaving her stranded on the island of Naxos. Scholars have noticed that she speaks in tones that echo Catullus's own feelings of betrayal by Lesbia. Still, I did not see how to take the argument further until, by a happy coincidence, or rather by two coincidences, my eyes were opened. The first was the privilege of serving as an external examiner on a brilliant doctoral thesis with the title Acratic Catullus, from acrasia, without self-control, and the moral conflicts of desire by Leah O'Hearn, which was submitted to La Trobe University in Melbourne, Australia, and will soon appear as a book. O'Hearn views Catullus's love poetry as the scene of a tension between Catullus's characteristically Roman values of masculine self-control and his subjection to erotic passion, which gains the upper hand. Catullus thus conforms to what Aristotle described as the acratic individual, that is, one whose values conflict with his desires and who fails to master the desires despite all his efforts. The psyche is thus subject to stress and conflict, which may be expressed as an inner dialogue, alternating between self-reproach and surrender, along with a concomitant vacillation of mood. One of the most prominent characteristics of the acratic figure is remorse. O'Hearn identifies this syndrome in poem 99, as well as elsewhere. As we've seen, Juventius wiped away Catullus's kiss as though his mouth, Juventius's mouth, had been poisoned by wormwood. That's what hellebore is. But ambrosia and hellebore, as O'Hearn, following Ellis, observes, had medical applications as drugs. And she notes they might serve as cures for Catullus's own excessive passion. What if that bitter kiss that it turned into could be treated as a medicine? Hellebore in particular was good for clearing the mind. Juventius' act cured Catullus of his insatiable desire for kisses. He has learned a lesson, and a good one. Seen this way, Juventius is not merely a spiteful child refusing, rather, as O'Hearn writes, Juventius, the boy, protects his sexual virtue, exercising his personal dignity as a citizen male who cannot be violated. Broadly, she says, the poem suggests that the boy has grown up and that he has learned enkrateia, not self-control, in spite of his acratic teacher, Catullus. That's how Leo looked at it. The poem thus reveals a complex ambiguity in which Catullus both complains of rejection, but recognizes the proper limits to his desire, even if he really can't control it. The second lucky event in my engagement with this poem was my participation last summer in a workshop on Plautus that was held on the shores of Lake Como, where I heard a paper by Renata Raccanelli, a scholar whom I had long admired, but I had not met until then. The paper bore the title, and here it is, Pragmatica della comunicazione gestuale in Plauto, il bacio degli amanti nel Miles Gloriosus. And you can see right away why the bacio in connection with his poem might have been interesting to me. And as the title indicates, the paper applies the method known as pragmatics, more specifically in respect to gestures, to the function of the kiss in that comedy, the Miles Gloriosus. Pragmatics, as I'm sure you know, refers most generally to the entire process of communication, from including interjections, repetitions, pauses, and so forth, and also nonverbal elements such as facial expressions, posture, spatial relationship among the characters called proxemics, and physical gestures, on the last of which Raccanelli focused her. Recently, this approach has illuminated various texts, from drama to epic, lyric poetry, and more. In another paper entitled The Kiss in Plautus's Stickus, Notes on Gestures and Words in View of a Pragmatics of Comic Communication, very complicated title, Raccanelli observes, gestural language is ambiguous. Tears can express either joy or pain. A smirk can signify either complicity or contempt. A raised fist can symbolize a threat or an expression of unity. Secondly, she says, gestural language may be used either as an alternative to verbal language or in combination with it. So context can disambiguate the meaning of the gesture to provide a clue to its intention. Even when it is accompanied by an explicit statement, you can't really be sure. For example, in interpreting why the father, Antipho, in the Stickus, which is that play by Plautus, repulses his daughter's attempt to kiss him. Let's remember what's happening here. There's a father, the daughter attempts to kiss him, and he pushes her away. Raccanelli goes beyond the usual explanation, which ascribes it to his gruffness. He's just a mean father. And she calls adduces the so-called jus osculi, the right of a kiss, which she calls a well-known institution recommended by the most mighty. Cites a passage in Valerius Maximus, which shows how Sempronia, the sister of the Gracchi, declined a kiss to kiss a certain Equitius, thereby, she says, refusing to acknowledge him as the son of her brother Tiberius. So kissing is important. When you refuse to do it, you're making a real statement. Viewed in this context, Antipho's, the father's gesture, is tantamount, and here she says, to a refusal to recognize the girls as his daughters, almost an act of repudiation. Tantamount, and yet he doesn't say that. As Raccanelli remarks, and here's the next, she says, an explicit accusation of impudicitia, and therefore a verbal codification of such a repudiation of his daughters, would be quite incompatible with the comic context of Stickus. In Stickus, the denial of the ritual osculum is a gesture expressing what words do not and cannot say, not even as a pretense. So what she's saying is that repulsing the kiss, getting rid of the kiss, was effectively a way of suggesting the repudiation of the daughters, but not going so far, because this is comic context. So let's return to Juventius's rejection of Catullus's kiss. Catullus experienced the kiss he stole as pure delight, sweeter than ambrosia. And when Juventius wiped it off his lips, he took it as a rejection of his love, or at least of this public gesture of intimacy. Yet conceivably, it was just this presumption of attachment that Juventius found offensive. In his view, it may be, Catullus wasn't merely manifesting his affection in an exuberant way, but was making a claim to a deep kind of familiarity that Juventius was not prepared to acknowledge. Catullus is not a complete stranger. The problem is that with the kiss, he has overstepped a social boundary. Despite Catullus's heated rhetoric, Juventius was not necessarily disgusted by Catullus's gesture, any more than a person who has been subjected, let's say, to an unwanted caress. Somebody strokes the person, is repelled by the caress as such. It's the symbolic value that offends. That person could enter your space and touch you that way. In the modern example, such touching might be regarded as inappropriate sexual contact. In the ancient case, the kiss had more to do with a violation of status rules. True, Catullus doesn't say this in this poem, but the gesture acts in counterpoint to Catullus's description of the event, just as in the stickers. Catullus's comparison of his agony to that of crucifixion may well reflect also the kind of punishment that was usually reserved for slaves. So he's been looked at as a slave, as a two-sided sign. In the manner of gestures generally, as Racanelli observed, the kiss encapsulates both Catullus's sense of disappointed love, in much the way he interprets his affair with Lesbia, and at the same time serves to classify Catullus as an aggressive upstart, less subtle in his tactics perhaps than Aemilius, but also in the end less welcome in what he's doing, because Aemilius was successful despite his breath. Seen from this angle, the attempted kiss puts Catullus in his place and renders him as repugnant as he himself finds Aemilius and Victius. Now, disgust is in many contexts the naturalization of social distinctions. In his splendid book on Roman emotions, Robert Castor discriminates two distinct but not completely independent meanings of the word fastidium. Most immediately, fastidium signifies simple disgust, or what Castor calls a per se reflex, an instinctive aversion to something repulsive. The stimulus may be something naturally repellent, like some odors, although many of these responses are learned. Babies sniff indiscriminately without looking repelled, but we learn to be repelled. And disgust may be conditioned by repetition. You come to be revolted by a food that you eat too often. But fastidium may also indicate what Castor calls deliberative ranking. This is more like the English fastidiousness, a contempt for things that are regarded as inferior in value or status. For example, a gourmand, a very high-class person, may say about a McDonald's hamburger, "It disgusts me." He means that he has a kind of attitude toward it. Or let's say a patrician's aversion to very humble living quarters. You go into a simple home and, disgusting. So the two aspects of fastidium may overlap. For example, when class or racial prejudice comes to feel instinctive. Castor not only disambiguates the Latin term, but he describes what we may call an implicit ideology of fastidium. And this has two sides. On the one hand, members of a given community are imagined as sharing a common set of aversions or taboos. So when we're all together, we identify ourselves by saying, "Ooh, that disgusts me," and that constitutes our community. On the other hand, deliberative ranking, the kind where you just disgusted by people that don't belong, is minimized since everybody knows their place. If no one presumes on their betters, then there are fewer occasions for refined squeamishness. I think Castor's analysis has a direct bearing on the poems by Catullus that we have been examining, even though fastidium as a word is not used. Catullus's revulsion at the foul odor of Aemilius's mouth and also his hindquarters, and that of Victius certainly looks like per se fastidium. Odors are a prime source of disgust. We've all had the experience. We encounter somebody who smells bad, breath is bad, and we are revolted. There's nothing new. But Catullus transparently exploits the physical feature, as he chooses to represent it, as a figure for class or social contempt. Aemilius, after all, has pretensions to elegance. As for Victius, we may recall the final, repeat again, the final couplet in the epigram. If you want to destroy us completely, gape at us. What you desire, you will achieve. Si nos omnino vis omnes perdere. That's the Latin there. Si nos omnino vis omnes perdere. If you want to destroy us completely. Now, who are the us? Who are the us? If you want to destroy us, presumably Catullus' circle of cultivated gentlemen and women who form, in his view, a natural elite. When the tables are turned on him and Juventius treats Catullus' spittle as though it were filthy and disgusting like that of a prostitute, we may infer what Catullus does not explicitly say, that Juventius looks down on him the way he himself looks down on others. The rejection of a kiss functions here in much the same way that it does in Plautus's Stichus, as Racanelli shows. It reveals what is not expressed, even as it remains ambiguous, which is in the nature of gestures. A kiss is a gesture. So too, of course, is Juventius's response. Catullus ascribes no words to him, but merely describes the way he wiped his mouth with his fingers, which he had dipped in water. Nonverbal ranking is as effective as the spoken word, in part just because it requires interpretation. Saying nothing, Juventius leaves it to Catullus to construe his reaction, Catullus and us, the readers, and so Catullus can condemn himself out of his own mouth. But a kiss may also be regarded as a thing, an object, something like a theatrical prop. Kisses can be stolen, as in our poem, and they can be given, as in poem 5, and I'll show you that one here. You may remember these poems, Dami bacia mille, give me so many kisses, then 100, then 1,000 more. Or in Carmen 7, quaeris quatmi baciationes tuae lesbias superque, you're asking me how many kisses are enough. These are kisses that are given, that are bestowed. They're like props, they're like things. And in the end, he fears that intruders may total up the number and somehow cast a spell or bewitch the lovers. Quae nec per numerare curiosi possin nec malafascinara lingua. Okay, so on Juventius, Catullus hopes to bestow 300,000 kisses, or as he puts it, a whole harvest of them, thicker than a wheat field. I won't just read this, but that's the 300,000 kisses he wants to give in another poem. Well, that's a lot of kisses, he says. So these enumerations, however, are rather abstract. In poem 99, the one we're reading, the single kiss is represented in all its physicality, with the mention of lips, fingers, mouth, and saliva. And these right in the middle of the epigram, lines 7 to 10, with 6 lines before and 6 lines after. The kiss takes the form of a substance that has been planted on Juventius's lips. And this is what elicits his disgust. The body, when reified, is liable to induce sentiments of repulsion as well as attraction. A poet must be careful in evoking the body with very clinical precision. We recall Ellis's reference to the medical character of the language here. Maybe this, by the way, is why Catullus refrains from mentioning any part of Lesbia's body except for her foot, and only once. There's only one place where Catullus actually tells you anything about the body. As we have seen, Catullus is much more liberal in his references to the body in his invective poems. Orifices in particular are dangerous territory. They convey processes of digestion and hint at decay as well as growth, as Michael Bakhtin observed. If we think of the kiss as a thing in its own right, then we may imagine it as escaping from Catullus's control. It's not just something he does or takes. It begins to have a life of its own. Recent developments in what is sometimes called the new materialism, or more prosaically, thing theory, have focused on the affective relationships that may obtain between human beings and inanimate objects. An example is Philoctetes' bow. The hero's attachment to it is represented in Sophocles' tragedy as more than instrumental, even though it's crucial for his life. In a paper that bears the title, Love is in the Hands, affective relationships with objects in votive dedications, Anne-Sophie Noël writes, and here I'll give you the next passage. She writes, if mentions of the hands are meaningful in funerary epigrams, can we postulate that what is offered to a divinity by one's hands, or even by one's loving hands, philais, is endowed with an affective value? It is certainly a mark of piety and faith toward the God who receives the offering, but it may also hint at an affective relationship with the object itself, the object which has been held and manipulated by these very hands before being hung up on a god statue or deposited in his or her temple. So this is a way in which modern thing theory has developed this awareness of the props. Less attention has been paid, I think, to hostile affect relationships to things. But Juventius's disgust at Catullus's kiss has just such a negative valence. One line of thought, especially associated with Bruno Latour, has gone so far as to endow objects with agency. They are not just acted upon, they act. As Lieselotte Sarbe-Jeltsch writes in a volume on the power of things, and here's her comment, things normally understood as inanimate objects, as mirrors against we reflect wishes, meanings, social signs, economic value, and even obscure forms of religious power. These things now become agents in their own right. Things can do stuff. That's the implication of this new theory. The theory behind such pronouncements is highly controversial, but Catullus's kiss seems almost to have an identity of its own. It begins by offending Juventius, and then, as though infected with the boy's revulsion, it turns bitter in the mouth of Catullus himself. In objectifying the kiss, Catullus is, at the same time, turning it into the object of Juventius's disgust, rather than fully acknowledging his own responsibility as the aggressor. Oh, the kiss did it. I didn't do it. The kiss did it. The boy rejects, according to this poem, not the lover or his action, but the kiss. So Catullus will not steal any more kisses, but he's not terminated the affair. This is the advantage of focusing on the thingness of the kiss. And now I come to the end of our conversation. Indeed, there is some question as to whose kiss it is. Catullus stole it. We don't reflect on the authentic meaning of the word. He stole it. Did it belong to Juventius? If I steal the kiss, does it belong to the other? If so, then it was Juventius who had the right to give it or not. On a sentimental reading, Catullus placed a little peck on Juventius's lips, a sign of his love, and the boy rudely rejected him and subjected him to humiliation. But if we separate the gesture from the narrative or the object from the human agents, there opens up a space for ambiguity and an alternative reading, one that is not entirely controlled by Catullus's own voice. Juventius, on this view, is not a spoiled child, but someone whose role in what should be interpreted as an interpersonal reaction has been suppressed or denied. He's been objectified. Instead, the kiss may be seen as an assault on Juventius's body. And if it tastes like hellebore to Catullus, it's no more than what he deserves. And so, inevitably, the question arises. Did Catullus mean the poem to be read in this way? Did he intentionally distinguish the gesture from the spoken word, as Plautus did? The cases are not strictly analogous, for Plautus the poet might signal meanings to his audience that were opaque to the characters in the comedy, whereas Catullus is speaking in his own voice. But then, this is to confuse the poet with his persona, the persona who knows nothing, for example, about the two poems that precede this one in the collection, and so is unaware. Catullus's persona in the poem is unaware of his place of foul-mouthed poems. But if Catullus had a hand in arranging these, well, then he knew, the poet knew, that this was the culmination of these three poems. He knew what he was asking us to see, even though the character in the doesn't see it. And so the inside character may not be conscious of the cross signals deriving from the gesture of the kiss, as opposed to the meaning he would ascribe to it, or of the way things may speak a language of their own. If, despite the seductive illusion of authenticity that Catullus' poems project, we allow that the poet may be canny, may be sophisticated enough to undercut the complaint of his self-serving alter ego by clustering of poems of like theme and the silent speech of gesture and object, then we may find in this poem the spark of a self-critical awareness. It is, I would like to think, Catullus's Me Too moment. Gracias and thank you.
Agradecemos al doctor David Konstan su magnífica conferencia magistral, como ya nos tiene acostumbrados cada vez que lo recibimos en México. Muchas gracias. Y ahora procedemos, bueno, le están aplaudiendo, doctor, si usted lo puede ver en la pantalla, le están aplaudiendo muchos participantes, le están dando su admiración intelectual. Y si ahora ustedes tienen, bueno, hay varias participaciones. Entonces, la doctora María Teresa Galás, por favor.
Bueno, sí, perdón. Bueno, en realidad yo estaba aplaudiendo, pero me parece muy, pues que pone una situación que ha trascendido de lo poético, de lo literario a la vida real, porque para nosotros ahora, para nosotros ahora
no se oye.
Doctora Galás, su micrófono, por favor. Doctora Galás, su micrófono, por favor.
Qué horror. Bueno, perdón por mis perros. Ha trascendido una cuestión que se ha tratado como puramente literaria en la antigüedad y en los estudios clásicos. Me parece muy interesante este vínculo de la cuestión del beso, que ha sido tratado incluso de una manera muy idealista, el amor, etcétera, para ubicarlo en esta cuestión del Me Too, que realmente conmovió los cimientos morales en todo el mundo. Entonces, pues como siempre, el doctor Konstan nos sorprende y me parece muy, muy adecuado, muy oportuno en este momento esa trascendencia de lo literario, lo puramente literario, digamos, lo poético, toda esta visión incluso de la crítica literaria que trasciende a la cuestión social, no en un análisis sociológico, sino en una interpretación libre, muy libre, que hace el doctor Konstan de una reacción puramente humana, independientemente de que podamos ubicar diferentes valores entre Catulo y nosotros. Yo creo que esta interpretación del doctor Konstan pone en relieve siempre la cuestión de la violencia, hacia la violencia en el amor, entre comillas, y la violencia hacia los grupos o hacia los individuos más vulnerables. No sé qué opina el doctor Konstan.
Well, thank you very much. Muchísimas gracias por el comentario, porque es muy interesante. I'll just say in English that Catullus is a poet who can imagine himself as a flower cut down at the edge of a field by a plow. And someone who has that sense of what mindless violence can do without even noticing that it is cutting down something precious. This is a poet who could well have anticipated how apparently innocent rituals of stealing a kiss at a party or wherever he was could really be an abuse of the other. And he could even frame it in such a way as to force us to see the thing from two sides, as I think he may have had readers sophisticated enough to do. So thank you. Muchas gracias por el comentario.
Thank you.
Doctor, tenemos comentarios de YouTube felicitándolo, de María Reina Carreto Rangel y de Nata Casarini de Freitas. Bueno, tenemos manos levantadas. Le voy a dar la palabra ahora a C. Schmider, por favor.
Hello, David. It was nice to listen to you.
Hello, Carlos. How are you?
I'm fine. Little hello from Berlin to you. It was a pleasure to listen to you. Actually, I wanted to give you one point to think, because do you know the film by François Truffaut, Baiser volé, Stolen Kisses? Have you ever seen this French film?
Yes, very good. I have, and a long time ago. Thank you for that reference, because I know you know films much better than I do. So, Carsten, that's a pleasure. Thank you.
All about French films, you know.
Well, you know more, yes.
It's a very interesting film from 1968. And, you know, about that period when everything got more open, you could talk about, you can explain things in other ways, which you can't do before. Mm-hmm. And it gives you also a hint to this certain kind of Roman perspective, you know, because French culture belonging more to the Roman culture. And it's quite different from our German or English American point of view. Mm-hmm. Perhaps one day you will see again that film, and you will enjoy it, and you will change some ideas on this topic of stolen kisses. And I don't know, perhaps you know that the stolen kisses are the most sweetest.
Well,
thank you, David.
Thank you very much, Karsten. Muchísimas gracias por el comentario y la referencia a la película. That was very, very good and very important. And I will follow up. Thank you very much, Karsten. Nice to see you.
Alexis Helmer Villalobos había levantado su mano. No sé si quisiera brevemente participar, preguntar. Alexis.
Gracias, muy amable, doctor. ¿Se me escucha?
Si escucha, sí.
Gracias. Bueno, pues quería primeramente darle las gracias por la conferencia tan interesante y tan sobresaliente, y después querría plantear una pregunta, a ver si pudiera daros algún comentario. En el entendido de que las diferencias entre sinónimos hay que tomarlas siempre con un grano de sal, sobre todo cuando hablamos de la poesía, pues intervienen motivos métricos y otros para la elección del vocabulario. ¿Podría la supuesta diferencia que marcan algunos autores entre osculum, basium, sabium, etcétera, dar alguna luz, alguna idea para poder entender un poco más sobre la reacción de Juvencio en este poema? Sobre todo teniendo en cuenta la definición de algunos glosarios que dan para la palabra sabium como osculum cum saliva cum mixtum, por ejemplo.
Sí. Pues tengo que pensar otra vez en esos atributos del beso y del oscurum. Seguí en este contexto la discusión de Renata Raccanelli, porque ella puso énfasis en lo que se llama el ius osculi, precisamente el derecho de dar un beso o de recibir un beso, y que eso es una cosa en una sociedad en que se besa típicamente. Ahora, en ese sentido es diferente de por ejemplo, la cultura de Estados Unidos, donde no se besa de esta manera tan típicamente, aunque ahora poco a poco estamos aceptando cada vez más esa manera de aceptar a los demás o de encontrarnos con otro. Pero en una cultura como en España, donde en otros, en Europa, donde se da un beso normalmente, bueno, es un gesto, es un acto que en sí tiene mucha posibilidad de agresión. He visto cosas, he visto momentos en que un intercambio así ha sido un poco crispado, un poco de crispación, precisamente en este momento. Tiene derecho, uno se retira un momento, el otro se ofende. Es una negociación social complicada. Eso es lo que quería meter el énfasis en este contexto. Espero que haya contestado bien a la pregunta.
Doctor, tenemos felicitaciones de parte de la maestra Silvia Aquino. Y bueno, ¿alguien más tiene alguna pregunta? Porque ya estamos sobre el tiempo. Bueno, si nadie más quiere participar, no queda más que agradecerle infinitamente, doctor, su magnífica conferencia que realmente nos tiene acostumbrados ya a lo óptimo. Y bueno, esperamos verlo muy pronto. Los invitamos a todos ustedes a continuar con las actividades de este congreso y conectarse con la siguiente conferencia que inicia en 10 minutos. Infinitas gracias a todos.
Muchísimas gracias a todos por la participación y hasta pronto.
Hasta pronto, David.
A todos.
De nada, de nada.
Adiós a todos. Adiós.
Bye.